So now this is the formal welcome to everybody. Thanks for joining the live lectures or watching the recording later on. And today we will dedicate our lecture to full screen now, minimizing here, to territorial governance, which is a component essentially in understanding all these regional dynamics, not only across Southern Europe, but also in other parts of Europe as a European Union, as a continent as well. And the governance, the way we will define it, is very much aligned with the regional policy of the European Union, and it's a policy that entails or influences most of the components, economic, social, environmental domains that are within our surroundings of the places we live, the places we study, or the places we go for shopping, for example. We'll try to underline some of these aspects. A couple of notes here on my side, some elements that I have to come with you, share with you. First is about this examination. I've been receiving a number of emails about the possibility of having a second exam. I was not planning for that, but to follow somehow the rules within the university and to facilitate also your life, and most of you are in the final, this is one of your final courses, so I will certainly set up a second exam, and this certainly will already respond to a number of your questions. And here I'm a bit in a difficult relation with the student coordinator. I always like to receive the answers rather quickly, but these answers are not coming as quickly as I would like to. So we still referring to this first date of the 23rd of February next year, and the second date is yet to be announced. And also the first one can still be subject of change. One thing I'm sure, by looking at the calendar, everything will happen until the end of March, and hopefully we can do that before the mid of March, or eventually at the end of February. So we'll have two exams, and they will have the same format. No need to come to me with that questions. They will have the same format, and to avoid confusions on when I should deliver my take-home mini essay, the 1,000 words essay I asked you, part of the standard examination is only to be delivered on the day of the exam, first or second. So I don't want to receive those that will do the exam on the second date. I don't want to these mini essays before that. So the day of the exam, you submit together with your answers, with your responses to the questions, also this mini essay. And already another part of this mini essay, indeed, I acknowledge that at some point these mini essays can be very much opinion driven. And some of you already wrote me an email proposing a number of topics. I tend to concur with you and support your idea. I also understand that at some point you have to bring more of your personal experiences. What I am asking you is to try to find literature, 1-2 references that can support your argumentation. How, if you ask me what it entails, the components of a nice or a well-written take-home mini essay, is this narrative, a constructive narrative that we can find a flow, a kind of a storyline where you can support your arguments even based on observations. You visit this place, this regional geography, you have noticed a specific regional issue, you have an idea about it, very much personal. Your background here, you remember when we talk about this co-construction and of concepts, so your background will influence your perceptions. So if you can find one or another reference to back up your thoughts, that will be really great. Okay, any questions in this regarding? Please feel free to come through voice or through chat right now, or later on via email, as you wish and feel more comfortable to do it. I think these are the notes here that I would like to share with you before. So the territorial governance of Southern Europe is a fundamental component here for us to then to then bridge to the fourth lecture and fifth lecture on the planning and planning systems and economic geography of Southern Europe. Understanding this governance is certainly a key component for the explanations I will bring to you next lecture on the planning systems. And these are two of my favorite domains while studying regional issues, regional geographies in territories. And something that I always like to grasp at the beginning when we are start talking about the governance as we enter these more somehow conceptually slash practical oriented lectures from now on until the last one. The last one is still a matter of being adapted to some of your interests. So what I asked you now to see if we can do, although online, a kind of more interactive session here, although with a reduced number of participants, is if you can use the chat here and come to me with 1-2 words on how you define governance. Well, if I ask you, please, can you define governance in 1 or 2 words? What are those words? What comes to your mind right away? There are no rights or wrongs here. There is no assessment. So just feel free to drop a couple of ideas, and we will certainly try to pick one or another to discuss later on. So please, if you can come with a writing on the chat, how would you define governance? That will be very interesting, certainly for us to evolve on the lecture. So while you are thinking about that and doing that, and I will keep tracking of what you are answering here on the chat. Again, there's no rights or wrongs, 1-2 words on how you define governance. That will be really interesting for me also to understand where you position yourselves also within the discussion, and to the extent I can go a little forward in terms of conceptualization of the governance. All right, thank you so for starting the chat, Anna, in this regarding, and so please join Anna on the comments, and Anna Clara on the comments, and also drop your ideas. And there are different ways of defining governance, and this varies dramatically from one country to another, and even from one group of countries such as Europe to another one, United States, Canada, North America in general, or Latin America. This also varies the way that it's interpreted in less developed economies, so-called global south, if you want to use the terminology, always controversial. And so we have studies more focused on urban governance, others more focus on the regional dynamics and using governance to explain these regional dynamics, a number of literature in this regarding. And we tend to converge as geographers studying regional issues involved in planning and economic geography, for example, as I am. Thank you so much for your inputs. We tend to converge on two domains within this framework of so-called spatial, place-based, so based on a specific geography. That's the key fundamental idea that I want you to take from the lecture today, is that we are specifically focused on a geographical domain of governance, a geographical interpretation of governance, spatial, place-based, if you will, multi-level governance. So we tend to converge on the concepts of territorial governance and evolutionary governance theory as well. We'll particularly focus on Southern Europe and on the concept of territorial governance. And you have in your OLAT platform, lecture number 3, a number of very interesting documents, practical oriented and also academic oriented, defining territorial governance. Very simple readings, I think. If you don't have to read all the books, for example, but the first chapter, introduction, they explain you very well what they mean by territorial governance. So let me pick up your brains here on the governance definition. Some of you say that is leading a country. Indeed, leading is about leading, taking leadership, but fundamentally here in this territorial governance, nice that you put the word leading, is helping on the decision making. So the governance as we understand it within Europe is going somehow beyond this leading. Is indeed about guidance, is about providing new rules, a new set of rules, eventually coming with a new ways of addressing some specific issues, and this involves what needs to be addressed at the present time. And we have currently economic aspects because of the current crisis related with COVID-19, for example, or we have the dramatic issue of addressing climate change or the negative impacts on the environmental degradation. So entails indeed organization of rules following what already is there, what exists, the practices, the way of dealing with the things, the way of working. And this is very much related with planning, environmental issues, energy issues. So it's also about dealing with rules and engaging with both formal and informal authorities. And what this Peter Schmidt from Germany and Lisa Van Well, authors of this book that I will show you later on, they underline very concretely that the informal components of the governance play a fundamental role. So some of you are here sharing your ideas, and they go what I will classify more on the formal domains of the governance. And but then there is a turning point that is essential, and it's also a take-home message, that we are focused here on what happened after this turning point. So the discourse within the organization of the economic landscape of the planning systems evolved from an approach from government, more this understanding the regulations, acknowledging the authority of some institutions. So this formal organization of the territory, formal organization of the dynamics that happens in this regional context, in this territory, for example, a region, an urban region, to a more informal set of rules, informal set of arrangements. And these arrangements it's vague and embraces a number of possibilities of dealing with these issues. Again, mostly about territorial planning, the way the physical boundaries of certain territories are organized. And so others of you touch upon indeed the role of the institutions, the relationship between institutions is all about this. So we are all, I'm happy that we are all in the same pace, in the same page here. And indeed also involves, as Tim underlines here, the private sector, and we'll see a couple of examples later on. So take home ideas here. We are focused on the what happens next after this turning point from governments, organization, this formality, authority, formal institutions, well-defined boundaries, well-defined administrative rules within them, to a more informal set of arrangements, new rules, new practices, bringing our own knowledge, tacit knowledge, expert knowledge, involvement indeed of private actors, if you will, stakeholders as well. So thank you so much. I think this was a nice, interesting, nice exercise and interesting. Thanks for sharing your thoughts with us in the lecture. So let's see then if we can grasp this a little bit. And then what I'm sharing with you today is basically a summary of two projects and one publication, the one by Peter Schmidt and Lisa Van Well. And they both, or this publication, this book on territorial governance, bridge insights from practice-oriented research undertaken within this ESPON, the Observatorium for the Spatial Development of the European Union, or founded by the European Union, mainly the European Regional Development Fund, and is very easy. Is also in your OLAT platform, is open access, is online. You can Google it and find the authors involved and all the methodological details as well, if this is of your interest. Maybe some of you will go later on in your career to work in municipalities or in regional councils, and then you may need to access some of the studies by ESPON, as they tend to influence how regional policy fundamentally in the European Union is conducted, conducted or prepared and then implemented or operationalized. So let me read the slide here on the territorial governance. As you see, the relation, they go along with explanations in terms of territorial governance without neglecting spatial planning. That's a fundamental component of the governance the governance of Europe and the governance of Southern Europe in particular. It tells that comprised institutions that assist in active cooperation. So is here a key word on this turning point from government to governance, cooperation across governments, I will say, across formal authorities, the national, regional, local / municipal here, and then within the governance discourse that came to be since or primarily after 1998, the year 2000, mainly in Europe, it's about this some sort of this transition to a more cooperative puzzle where different entities from the economic sector, from the more formal policy-making sector come together to coordinate decision making and actions, long-term, short-term actions, with the prime goal of improving the quality of life of their territories, of their regions, for example. So improving the spatial quality, and I mean here amenities, or if you want urban features, transportation, improving commuting between regions, between urban centers, for example, organizing the physical space of our urban regions, where to locate commercial activities, where to locate industry, where to locate the services, how to bring them into connection to facilitate commuting, and then basically facilitates everyday life. And there are also aspects involving more intangible spatial qualities, more aspects of culture and these dynamics. And the spatial planning system, then we will come back to it on the next lecture as the time is already accelerating. But basically, the spatial planning systems, we will certainly go into deep and into the detail about this. The next lecture is about this mediating or organizing the physical conditions of the territory, has to do with organization of land, location of property, location of developments, where of the things in a physical context. So Compass project, founded by the HESPON, led to this nice publication, a book with different chapters, brings together insights from 32 European countries, so covers partly the European Union and also associated countries. But the key case studies, these key case studies are urban regions, not specifically regions as Southern Europe, Portugal, Spain, and this publication lacks findings in terms of the governance in Southern Europe. So I had to go beyond this publication to bring you some interesting insights on the regional governance. I like this book particularly because it is a simple read. It states clearly from the beginning how they define territorial governance. As you may start understanding, then you can use governance to address a number of regional dynamics and regional issues, as far as you define it at the beginning. For example, you are writing your mini essay and you want to explore a governance issue, or you are questioning some sort of arrangement involving, for example, two different regions within Southern Europe or elsewhere, and you want to embrace a more critical approach to this governance arrangement. Maybe it's a governance arrangement that is too much open to the private sector, so the private sector is playing a dominant role, and you want to criticize this. That's all fine with me, and certainly with some of my colleagues. What is important is that you define the governance. How do you define governance in the beginning? You may rely on this territorial governance from this publication, and then you can bring also complementary definitions of governance. But it's important that you define the concept you are using at the beginning, shortly in one paragraph, so the reader, your reader will be able to grasp your definition and how you position yourself into this discussion. So this book offers very nice insights. Another one that offers very valuable insights in understanding governance is the evolutionary governance theory, a more complex reading, and I will not use it very much here. So I rely primarily on the first one that you can have at hand for your exam, for example, and then you are already aware that territorial governance will certainly be one of the questions within the exam. So I might ask you to define it, and I might ask you to give one of or another example based on also on your background on how a certain arrangement involving governance can unfold within this definition of territorial governance. The evolutionary governance theory book tells us basically that to understand governance, we have to look at the past. So like in evolution economic geography, where we underline that history matters to understanding the organization of the economic landscape. So as to understand the governance, the territorial governance of a specific geography of a region, then we have to look how the arrangements evolve through time. They probably evolve from governments, a more formalized approach to the organization of the territory, to a more informal set of practices, of new rules coming up, of new ways of dealing with the subjects. And another component that is important that you take with you from this lecture is that the way we define territorial governance, the way these authors define governance is very much influenced by so-called Europeanization of governance, Europeanization of spatial planning. So cohesion policy, European regional funds, since the very beginning, and in particular since the Europe 2020 strategy. Now there are a lot of new documents that align with a new multi-annual financial framework towards 2027. So, but the discourse of territorial governance has been highly influenced by the European regional policy. And all of those policies coming from the European Union, they have been influencing the way that territories within Europe, Southern Europe, for example, have been organizing themselves, have been reorganizing their approach to governance in administrative terms and also in planning terms. And if the authors underline that if this European Union regional policy has been influencing the approach towards territorial governance, has been influencing less spatial planning within a specific territory, and has been influencing more environmental policy and energy legislation within these countries. So there are different domains of influence or yeah, direct or indirect impact of the European Union in the organization of our territories. And currently, the main discussions are regarding sustainability transition. So there is this idea that the European Union member states should follow similar patterns on this transition towards more sustainable manners of energy production, for example, or sustainable transportation. And the Green Deal will certainly play a role in supporting this uniformization, or again Europeanization of sustainability transitions. In this regarding, interesting here is that what I underline is that these new European Union member countries, they tend to adopt or to integrate European Union policies into their legislation, into their legal frameworks, in comparison to older member states. And you remember one of the slides of the last lecture, one comes to Southern Europe, and I think we also underline this later on. When it comes to Southern Europe, there is always some skepticism towards the implementation of European Union policies into national frameworks. So in one slide, summarizing the Peter Smith and Lisa Van Wel book, territorial governance, and it's certainly here an essential slide for the exam, I will say. Defining territorial governance. They define, and I align, my thoughts are aligned with them based on other complementary readings, entails formal and informal processes. And these processes, they bring together governments, as you rightly said, on the chat. It involves formal governmental institutions, regional governments, municipal governments, national governments, non-governmental organizations, environmental NGOs, grassroots movements, even maybe those that are more concerned with organization of neighborhoods, for example. So you go from smaller NGOs to more formalized NGOs regarding environmental issues primarily. Certainly the private sector, profit-oriented interest groups. These are real estate agents, which play a role in the development of land, for example, land developers, retail companies, industry, heavy industry, other types of industry, and certainly very important these days is the logistics. So the activity involving logistics, retail, supporting online shopping, for example, they play a fundamental role in the organization of the territories. Certainly, universities, research institutes, they are also part of this territorial governance, and in most of the cases reported in the book, they highlight the role of universities in bringing about some change to these urban regions. And ourselves, myself, yourself, as a citizens, we also have different ways in some regions more developed than others of engaging with decision making. So we are talking about formal and informal arrangements, processes with the ultimate goal of supporting decision making. So let's say these entities here, formal, informal, they come together, they join their forces, they share their knowledge, they share their way of dealing with specific issues, procedures, and tools, with one goal, with the goal of improving the quality of life. Okay, this is in a the broad way of speaking. Then we can concentrate this in addressing some specific issues such as or transportation, regional inequality, supporting sustainable development, supporting a more sustainable way of using non-renewable resources, for example. It's also to do with facilitating some financial mechanisms to support physical interventions in a territory. In a in an ideal context, but it doesn't happen that often, as a result of these governance arrangements, again, and repeating myself, involving formal and informal entities, they share their knowledge and share their expertise, though ultimately these arrangements, they will influence or destabilize a system, a system that is often composed of more formal and heavy institutionalized decision making. So in ideal context, again, it does not happen that often across Europe, as a result of these governance arrangements to destabilize the system and eventually bring about some change, sometimes structural change, going from one type of economy to a more evolved one, or addressing some specific issues regarding, for example, employment and absorbing labor force that for some time as being out of job, for example. So in ideal context, these governance arrangements will influence innovation, sometimes institutional innovation, and new institutions will be created as the result of these formal and informal arrangements involving a number of entities. And this is very much about sharing knowledge, not only the expert knowledge, but also the knowledge that we all hold on how to deal with specific issues. So these different actors from universities, the citizens, NGOs, they bring together their technical knowledge, their expertise, based indeed on their own experience, but also on the literature they have been reading, on their educational backgrounds, and also uh, uh, within territorial governance, certainly different than other types of governance. It's much about bringing together the tacit knowledge, the knowledge we all hold on how to deal with specific issues. These sometimes, again, results from our own observations. Maybe we travel somewhere, we travel to a specific region, and we notice a specific issue involving um, um, cultural disagreements, that then these cultural disagreements are impacting the way formal entities, for example, come together to cooperate and address some of these specific issues involving planning, energy issues, environmental issues. So this more the day-to-day knowledge that we all have plays a role in these territorial governance arrangements, the way it is defined by these authors, and also acknowledged by European institutions such as the ESPON. Essential here, again, and the key domain within this territorial governance is that emphasizes the informal arrangements. They acknowledge that the informal, they play an equal role as the formal ones. So when we are talking about territorial governance, we have to look how people engage with certain discussions. Now, what extent going out there to protest, to claim, to show our insatisfaction with how a system is dealing with specific issue, and these are variety of issues here. How these groups and these behaviors of contestation influence the discourse and can even lead to a system change. So territorial governance is about teamwork, is about bringing together the knowledge and the reactions towards some specific issues. And some of you maybe are more interested in planning issues. Some of others are more interested in economic issues within a specific regional geography. So then I call your attention for these two books on the entrepreneurial region and entrepreneurial state, and both they underline very much how territorial governance unfolds in economic geographic context. So both they underline that the development of some economies, for example, California in this context, Silicon Valley more specifically, they are the result of this territorial governance. They don't call it territorial governance. If you read more North American literature, you will come across of concepts such as multi-level governance, which I will say very much translates the same as how we define territorial governance. They underline how public, formally constituted and informal organizations came together to support economic development of this region. So if you are interested on this on more economic economic geography aspects and how governance plays a role in this context, I will have an example regarding Portugal. These are two interesting books. So I'm also here not to drop concepts and switch the page to the next lecture, but also pave the way for you and call your interest and support your eventual interest in some specific areas. And why studying territorial governance, in my opinion, and also shared by others, as I underline the sources here, is important in a regional geography context. This definition of territorial governance brings the space, brings the geography into play. So the geography or the spatial dimension is essential, is a core element within this definition of governance, and helps to address and understand regional dynamics. And that aligns very much with the key domain supporting regional innovation across the European Union. That is a place-based approach. So the place-based approach, that is an approach where the goal is to develop a specific policies targeting specific geographies and addressing the issues of these geographies, in opposition to the one-size-fitting-all policy that sometimes are organized in many geographical contexts to address a wide range of issues, but without being very specific to the needs of regions or of urban regions within these larger regions. So territorial governance brings the geography in the context. It devotes special attention to these territorial amenities, these territorial specificities. uh, can be features, can be the quality of educational institutions, can be the quality of the health sector, can be the quality of the transportation. So enhances or gives value to these features of these territories. And again, as I underlined before, it also emphasizes that territorial knowledge is very important while developing these place-based policies that are focused on specific issues of a specific geography to underline the territorial knowledge. So bring together different actors that have an expertise on that specific geography, so they will be better able to contribute to the policy making. They will support the decision making process with knowledge that can truly help address some specific issues. And currently, um, these specific issues involve very much sustainable development, as you certainly are aware of. It involves uneven development, or how to address this uneven development, regional inequalities, support territorial cohesion, and improve the overall quality of living within specific regions. The territorial governance is also very useful in the context of soft spaces. You may have heard about this if you, in other courses, you study more European Union regional policy. The soft spaces is this organization and decision makings that are taken in the context of regionalities, of regions that are loosely defined. You remember we talked about this in the last lecture. One of the examples is this mega region involving different countries along the Danube River. So this is a loosely defined region, so there is no single entity in charge of administrating it. So how they do it? They do it through territorial governance arrangements. Hopefully, this already helps you to grasp the definition of territorial governance. So there is no single administration, as you may also understand. The diversity of institutions, even the way they approach decision making in Austria certainly is different than the way they approach governance in Slovenia and in Croatia, in other parts of this mega Danube region. So they come together to address some specific issues, maybe mainly related to water management, transportation through the river, for example. So it involves different domains, different identities, different cultures, different ways of dealing with the subjects, again, different customs as well. So territorial governance somehow appear as a concept uh, able to bring together regional governance, urban governance, informal arrangements, formal institutions, in the way that they address what specific issues. They address sustainability transitions, they address energy and environmental issues in this broad region, loosely defined, and what unites it is simply the river. So when I start reading about territorial governance, I found it interesting, as they tend to find a domain as an anchor, and here is the river that can bring these territories together in a with one specific goal of addressing, of supporting the common good, supporting or improving the quality of living within this territory. Another example is also the Baltic Sea Vision, here with a number of institutions more formally organized, such as the Nordregio, based in Stockholm, Sweden, and they have a number of responsibilities in terms of spatial development, also spatial planning across these territories, but it still a regionality, a loosely defined region, and they work very much based on these territorial governance arrangements, and they bring together public and private entities. And before we go to the break, and then the second part will be more on the southern parts of Europe, I have studied all of these cities in terms of the territorial governance within their planning systems, and that this is a component that I will explore later on. And the aim of these two slides is to underline that many of the elements, domains, sometimes the words here are difficult to explain, that the domains you have to deal in everyday life, and myself I have to deal, being this, for example, taking the bus to the university, or the train, or the tram. If you think through, probably all of what you encounter in this everyday life, even going to the supermarket or to this commercial location, is the result, or has been the result of these territorial governance arrangements. And these cities are examples of this, how they deal with territorial governance in their planning systems, the development of lands, new housing facilities such as here in Dublin, improving of the transportation in Stockholm, again, new urban developments in Oslo. They are all the result of territorial governance, means they are all the result of actors, public and private, coming together to support a specific issue, or to help to operationalize a need that is essential to support the quality of living in this urban region. For example, more housing, more social housing, better transportation, addressing some issues involving water management to avoid the negative impacts of floods, for example. The same applies in these urban regions of Stuttgart, Barcelona, Cardiff, Milan, Hanover. The planning system, the way they plan that urban region is all the result of different arrangements, different governance arrangements, which we can put them against the concept of territorial governance and use it to explain territorial governance slash spatial multi-level governance. I will put these two concepts aligned and in the same level of conceptualization. So then we will jump to more concrete examples on the global on the southern parts of Europe by taking this territorial governance concept with us. So let's do a 10 minutes break and we'll come back after that. Okay, let's go through the second part. Hopefully everybody's back. So in the next two slides, they basically summarize what I've been sharing with you on the meaning of territorial governance, and that basically, and putting it simple, is about the interplay between the state, economic actors, market actors, if you will, and the civil society. And that's exactly the way in these urban regions I pointed out earlier, they have been doing their planning. They have been involving the citizens. They bring different expert knowledge together. They involve a number of interest groups, and they come to negotiate about the specific location of developments of housing, of social housing, of commercial activities, and of industry. And the insight from evolutionary governance theory is underlining here what my comment before is to acknowledge that these governance arrangements within a specific geography, they evolve through time. So history matters when we are trying to understand some specific problems, some specific issues. And the authors underline that governance observes problems, is able to identify them, to characterize them, and understand the different flows influencing these problems, and is able to address them and eventually create other problems regarding with these governance arrangements, maybe contesting the governance arrangements or underlying that they are leading to some sort of spatial inequality or unevenness in terms of development. So governance is in a constant evolution. The challenging here for the next slides is that I try to balance the formal and informal arrangements regarding Southern Europe, Portugal, Spain, Italy, and Greece. And I tried also to touch upon the different components as underlined by Schmidt and Van Well. So if you want to disentangle territorial governance, you will look at this framework and we'll see that the meaning of governance here is entails coordination of different actors, public and private, formal and informal institutions. It involves different policy sectors, energy sector, planning sector, environmental, transportation, education, health, and other type of facilities and public services. It requires the involvement and participation of different stakeholders. It requires to be adaptive to change and being able to easily respond to situations of crisis, for example, being this economic or related with a health crisis, for example. And ultimately the goal is to address some specific problems of regions and the territories within these regions. So focus on realizing place-based territorial specificities and helping them to improve their overall quality of life. And here it's important to include employment, um, uh, other public services, improving the educational facilities, and a number of all other facilities that are important to and play a role in the quality of life of these territories. So let's use the last 36 minutes that we have to see if we can grasp, or I can help you to grasp a little better what's going on in the southern part of Europe. I'm starting with Portugal, and I may spend a bit of time within Portugal, as is one of the territories I know best, and I can explain a little better how the governance in Portugal happens, and also the main difference in comparison to Spain, Italy, and Greece. So we are talking about a territory composed of 18 districts and 2 autonomous regions, and these are highlighting here and emphasizing, these are the only 2 autonomous regions. Very important for the comparison that it is with the other territories, with the other countries in Southern Europe. Only 2 autonomous regions, Azores or Açores, and the 2 group of islands, Açores and Madeira. So the other regions within Portugal, they are not autonomous regions, so they are very much dependent on the central state located in Lisbon. And you remember one of the slides of the second lecture that we are talking about lagging behind territory, excluding the greater area of Lisbon. And these lagging behind regions and sub-regions, here divided in the 18 districts, is composed of 308 municipalities and 3,000 parishes, or the lower level below the municipality level. Some of them, or all of them, they have, except the districts, the autonomous regions, they have higher administrative capacity. They have autonomy to in terms of in legislative terms, in terms of policy making, and in financial terms as well. They have their own budgets. All the other regions, they lack capacity of legislation by themselves, and this is a fundamental difference in comparison to the other 3 countries of southern parts of Europe. Let me bring the idea of this evolutionary governance theory here into the discussion. What's happened is that if we look to the if we look some 45 years ago to the current times, these districts, these 18 districts that you see here organized, they have been losing administrative capacity in favor of this governance, in favor of this territorial governance, meaning in favor of this informal, cooperative coordination involving public and private actors, not necessarily within the same administrative bubble, not necessarily municipalities or parishes, but involving different municipalities across administrative areas, and involving also educational institutions, the private sectors, as we will see. Spain, comparatively different. We are talking about, remember, okay, 2 autonomous regions, Azores and Madeira, and Spain, 17 autonomous communities, very much in administrative terms. Of course, there are a lot of small elements here that I'm not going through that, and you also don't have to go through that. Very in administrative terms, some difference in terms of the autonomous regions of Portugal and the autonomous regions of Spain, but the principle, the administrative principle, they have autonomy in terms of budget, financial autonomy, and legislative autonomy is comparably higher to the other regions of Portugal, where there are no autonomous regions. So Spain, 17 autonomous communities, 2 autonomous cities, Ceuta and Melilla, and 50 provinces and 8,000 municipalities. Of course, the territory is much larger in comparison to Portugal, but key difference here, we are talking about a national state divided in autonomous communities, and these autonomous communities, they have a stronger decision-making capacity when compared to Portugal. And then Italy. Italy, what I found the most interesting here to share with you is that these macro regions, they follow the NUTS level 2, this nomenclature of territorial statistics unities. They are they have sub-regions within these macro regions, while in Portugal, addressing northern part, center, and the southern part is what I will say is merely geographic, more about the spatial location in the north and in the south. It doesn't help you to grasp any administrative organization. That's why then we have other kind of territorial arrangements. Let me go through that. And in Italy, they have these 20 regions, of which 5 have greater autonomy than the other 15. So these other 5 with a larger autonomy, they were created, or they have this governance arrangement in terms of more formal part of this governance arrangement, because of cultural differences involving them and in comparison to the other 15. But we are talking about a territory, a national state divided in regions with a stronger decision-making capacity in comparison to the Portuguese one, and similar to those of the 17 autonomous communities, comunidades autónomas in Spain. In Greece, the scenario in terms of territorial governance slash administrative slash formal arrangement, okay, not here neglecting the informal ones that happens beyond this administrative boundary of the administrations. What we see is the result of a recent developments with the approval of a Kallikratis, if I'm pronouncing well, program in January 2011 that reorganized the Greek territory into 7 decentralized administrations, 13 regions, and 325 municipalities. Some more specific elements later on in the next slides. So let's focus on Portugal first, and then Spain, Greece, and Italy, and then see if we can still have time to wrap up the meaning of territorial governance in Southern Europe. Sometimes we have these very curious situations in Portugal where you are leaving one municipality, for example, leaving Lisbon, you are entering another municipality, Oeiras, exactly in the same border as you see. This is a photo, not an assemblage of photos. So you are leaving one, you are entering another, very common also elsewhere. But the question here is that while Lisbon has a greater area, still has an influence in this other municipality called Oeiras here. Oeiras, as his own administration, is a municipality, elects the mayor, and plays a role in the organization of the territory in this context, and in some part needs to go to Lisbon for some arrangements in terms of transportation, fundamentally when involves commuting primarily, or transportation in support of commuting, or intermunicipal bus or trams or trains. And also some of these parishes, which we call freguesia, in these larger urbanized municipalities, conselhos, they also, because of the private actors that do or operate from that parish, because they play a stronger role in absorbing labor force, they also have a stronger decision-making capacity, not formally constituted, but they act in favor of spatial development, of improving the quality of life. They operate in favor of their populations because, or through governance arrangements. So although there are no formal regions administrating these municipalities and parishes, they still doing their coordination. They still acting in the territory and addressing some specific issues through a number of territorial governance arrangements. And let's bring the evolutionary component here. What I'm sharing with you regarding Portugal in terms of this organization, we have to go back a number of years, almost practically 70 years, to the so-called Carnation Revolution, the Revolução dos Cravos in 75, which put an end to the dictatorship that was administrating Portugal for 40 years. And then the first constitution in 1976, which brought this territorial organization the way we still have it today. National level with a centralized government holding most of the decision-making capacity. The districts now, because of the European Union integration, losing capacity, and they don't have, they still exist more for historical purpose, but they don't really have any autonomy in any matter. Now is everything, all the matters regarding or education or transportation, industry, industrial planning, and other smaller scale planning is within the hands of the municipalities. So we have to also in the other countries to truly understand how a specific territory, mainly in the southern part of Europe, is organized. Then we have to look to the past and how this evolved through time. What kind of institutions have been created to support this type of territorial organization? So here, two fundamental aspects is that we only have two autonomous regions, as I said before, and they have their regional governments. So people, they vote for these regional governments. It doesn't happen anything like this in the rest of the country, in the part within the Iberian Peninsula. So we have elections for the municipalities, for these 308 municipalities. So people, they vote for the mayor, but they are not. There is no voting, any type of voting involving these intermunicipal communities, and it's something that I want to underline here in terms of their territorial governance. So these intermunicipal communities, they emerge to respond to the calls of the European Union to have more organized or stronger cooperation involving municipalities. So if these municipalities, these 308 municipalities of Portugal, if they wanted to apply for some specific European funding, they had to come together and work together to present a package, projects addressing issues across municipalities. So these intermunicipality communities, they emerge as a territorial governance arrangement, responding informally to the lack of regional autonomy. Okay, where we have to put aside here Azores and Madeira, these two regional autonomies. They have their own administration, own regional government. They vote every year for their regional budget, and we have the rest of the country organized in a more informal manner, although you can now have access to the composition of these intermunicipal communities. They all have their websites, so they are formal, organized currently, but they are the result of informal arrangements, mainly with the goal of applying for EU funding. And this EU funding target mainly improving, again, I've been repeating this quite a lot, transportation, education facilities, even creating new research and development unities in some of these municipalities. Um, so, and these arrangements, these intermunicipal communities, they are the result of the need to apply for EU funding, but because also in 1998, in the referendum, the Portugal citizens decided to vote against the creation of autonomous regions, which would have put Portugal in a similar administrative organization in comparison to what we have now in Italy, in Greece, and in Spain. So currently, 17th of November 2021, Portugal lacks a regional administration with capacity to legislate and to operationalize their own regional policies. Is still a very highly centralized state. And fortunately, the positive side is that in terms of planning, spatial planning, the municipalities have been acquiring some decision-making capacity to organize their own territory, but then they lack financial resources, and then they depend of the annual budget from the government, or they depend on the successful of their applications to European founding. And together with these intermunicipal communities, we have the two largest urban areas in the country organized as metropolitan areas. But here in administrative terms is again much about social housing, education, but up to the secondary school, not higher education, health service, but also to the in a lower level, not district or regional, somehow regional based hospital, so in the lower level of the healthcare system. So they engage with some specific issues, but in a lower level, not in this regional level involving a large number of municipalities, and they are very much focused on urban issues. neglecting other rural issues. So to underline, from this from the division in terms of districts that they've been losing their capacity, Portugal converge and try to overcome the no to autonomous regions in a form of intermunicipal communities. So a number of municipalities, about in average, I will say 18 to 20 municipalities, they come together to develop their own spatial plans, their sectorial plans for industry development, plans, for example, underlining to what extent universities or research centers can help the region to develop it. So this organization is, again, to respond to the calls of the European Union to have a more cohesive territory, and also the economic purposes is the anchor here in this territorial organization of Portugal. So that's what I underline here in this diagram. Through the years and more or since the European 2020 strategy, somehow a flagship strategy here coming from the European Union. Uh, I won't say that yeah, that it's possible to identify some domains of decentralization from the central government to other levels of administration, mainly the municipal, mainly the intermunicipal one, but it still lack this. They still lack this autonomy of being able even to position themselves and addressing through their own resources their specific needs. We do have this north, center, and south regional administrations, but they exist, I will say, more in terms of um, um, to position or to give some more administrative sense to this geographical location of being in the north or being in the center. How the reality unfolds is through these intermunicipal entities, which is slightly different than what happens elsewhere in the country. So duties of these intermunicipal entities is, again, is very much about applying for European Union funding. It involves, I said before, I will say smaller issues in terms of in administrative terms, in legislative terms. They have no capacity of bringing their own legislation into play. They still play a role in terms of the organization of the justice, but they go more in terms of social integration, and is more related with social housing and primary healthcare services, intermunicipal planning, and they also play a role and is a positive aspect in terms of their own tourism promotion. So that's for those that are more familiar with the country, you probably have heard about some branding strategy for Porto, trying to attract or tourists or investment to this to the second largest urban area in the northern parts of Portugal. But economic aspects and the guidelines from the European Union play a role in this territorial administration. Interesting to point out is that these intermunicipal communities and I applaud this, or I'm sympathetic to what they are doing. They have been able to really go beyond this lack of regional autonomy, and I'm here pointing out one in the northern part of the country, I call it AV, brings together about not at 60, about 16 municipalities, and they have been developing their own plans. For example, the National Production Support Program is certainly a place-based. Remember, I underlined this earlier. So they try to enhance their knowledge. So they know how to do well shoes, or they know how to deal well with textiles. They are trying to capitalize on those tangible assets, those tangible amenities, to boost their economic activity, and then help, which then will help them to internationalize and position themselves as a region, an intermunicipal sub-region, to host investment in this specific sector. So this organization, this territorial organization, is very much economic driven in this specific context. He specifically exactly underlines this legacy, this know-how, how to deal with specific specific industrial activities, and the goal is to bridge these more traditional sectors, the textile, the shoemaking, with some innovative technologies, some innovative ways of dealing with textiles and responding to the market. So they came together, these municipalities, they through governance arrangements involving the municipality, formal, and the private sector, also with the cooperation of universities, to develop three domains of territorial positioning. So they want to position themselves as a sub-region of culture, creation, and fashion. Also on the domain of agro-environmental food systems, because they here will benefit from the rural tradition in this sector, and also apply the development of technology to enhance these sectors. And there are a number of domains. They've been combining this traditional with new trends, so trying to respond to some of the needs of the market, for example, for craft beer, uh, uh, enhancing the potentials of, for example, mushrooms. And these are very specific, very small elements that they are coming together to enhance these traditional sectors of the society. And again, this is happening only because of this territorial governance, what we could classify as territorial governance arrangements, the result of the cooperation between municipalities and the private sector, for example, from the textile sector. And there are a number of very interesting examples combining this know-how, this tacit knowledge underlined it before, with some innovative aspects in terms of technology. They've been developing the incorporation of nanomaterials in the textile. And I'm not seeing your faces here, but I may hypothesize that if this is creating some confusion in terms of territorial governance. I underline again that what we see here, this innovation and this incorporation first is the result of European Union founding, and they will certainly, even they have some capacity, these private entities, to develop whatever they want in terms of their business model. They have been embracing this incorporation of technical components in textile because of the governance arrangements that exist within this intermunicipal community. And it involves, again, universities, also NGOs and groups of citizens that all together try to push forward these three domains. And for the sake of time, I will go through these examples. Is a number of examples incorporating this technology, or in the shoemaking, the textile sector. Some of these textiles are currently equipping some of the automobile sector elsewhere in Europe. Here is another example of an enterprise dealing or incorporating technology in their production processes. And in Spain, I see that the time will not allow us to go through all the countries. Let's see if I can underline the territorial governance of Spain, and then we'll come together to conclude this on the next lecture before the spatial planning, which there is a strong linkage. Talking about 17 autonomous communities, and here when we are dealing with regional governance, regional geography, and territorial governance, is important to understand the differences. So these 17 autonomous communities, also as the name helps to emphasize, they have a stronger decision-making capacity in different domains in comparison to those regions that they simply do not exist in Portugal. And these 17 provinces, they have sub-regions, the so-called 50 provinces. And here to underline that the central state still plays, although they have these autonomous regions with a number of responsibilities, the central government is in charge of a number of them. Migration, for example, international relations happens also in other parts of Europe. But these autonomous regions, they have a stronger decision-making capacity through legislation in terms of education, organization of the higher education system, not only primary healthcare services as in Portugal, but also general health system in these in these regions, and they also have a stronger decision-making capacity in terms of employment legislation, and through the budget they can afford to have, they have much more autonomy to decide in terms of economic development, the way they want to develop these specific regions. They have a capacity to do very much what they believe to be better to support their regional economies and their populations, and they have the freedom to choose what resources they want to use to achieve these specific aims without the need to wait for an approval from the central state, as still happening in Portugal, for example. Another difference fundamentally is that these autonomous communities, they have regional governments very well organized with ministries, very much as in other parts of Europe, in Central Europe. So they have autonomous capacity in terms of legislation and implementation of this legislation. So it's not only about deciding what is best, but also finding the ways to implement this specific legislation, and they are directly elected by the citizens. So in terms of an interpretation of this, I will say, regional democracy, some certainly here a strong difference in comparison to what is going on currently in Portugal. And here a more specific example of one of these autonomous communities, Galicia, in the northern part of Spain. And I'm underlining here Galicia because we will focus on that in one of our lectures on cross-border cooperation. Also works in terms of as a self-governance autonomous community. And again, there is no such a thing in Portugal, for example. They have an executive branch, they elect their president, they have a legislative branch and a judicial branch as well. So they work very much in a similar manner than a national state. And maybe some of you are more familiar with Galicia because of Caminho de Santiago, and why I underline it here, because the way it is organized currently, that different paths coming from Europe, from Portugal and elsewhere in Spain, they come together in this city called Santiago de Compostela, plays a fundamental role in the economic dynamic of this autonomous community of Galicia. Not only the Caminho de Santiago, the San James Way, as translated in English, but they also have been playing a stronger role in the economic landscape of Spain, because the group Inditex is located in this autonomous community, and they play a dominant role in economic aspects in terms of this Canada seafood, and also in terms of shipbuilding, and they have been benefiting immensely also from different European Union regional funds to support these economic activities. Both Galicia and Portugal, they had to prepare, and they rely very much in presence on this smart specialization strategy. So basically, is a core strategic document that aims to underline the regional potentials of these regions. So they only after having this smart specialization strategy, they are able to apply for specific European Union funding, as then they will underline that that's one of the sectors that is essential to boost the economy and eventually support a structural change, going from these lagging behind territories to a more developed ones. Both documents, both strategies for smart specialization underline again these regional features of Galicia and northern Portugal. And I will say that's the aim of the slide, that they came to prepare these frameworks, these smart specialization frameworks, underlining a number of domains because of the governance arrangements involving the different sub-regions in this context. And very much it is a disentangling this initial territorial governance framework, and you see now how the European discourse has been influencing the regional policies in these countries, is that for them to be able to identify the specific sectors, which some of them they will only be able to be operationalized because of the work of the private sectors, they had to come together to agree on the package. They had to come together through governance arrangements on how to prepare such a smart specialization framework. So what is going to happen after this framework of smart specialization in terms of public policy will be the result of these governance arrangements, will be the result of the involvement of the private sector, being this in the fashion side, in the health sector, together with a number of other sectors of the society, mainly research centers too, and then altogether they will be able to shape the public policy. Um, Again, here the common points, some of the common points here is that while in Spain, the autonomous community play a role in terms of operationalizing this public policy, bringing together different actors and domains. In Portugal, the intermunicipal communities are more in charge of this public policy and in boosting the regional activity by enhancing the regional qualities of these specific territories. So while reading the literature, you will certainly will encounter concepts such as co-creation, co-governance, and co-production, which somehow in their conceptualization they touch upon the elements that characterize territorial governance. Co-creation and co-production is basically about bringing together uh, different types of stakeholders and the citizens to support decision making. That's what we have been discussing throughout, maybe a bit faster than what I was planning, is the essence and the take-home messages that we are talking about, or public policy, or supporting decision making, and how to get there through different type of governance arrangements, disentangling this through cooperation involving different type of actors, public and private. They could create this smart specialization. They could produce public policies, means policies that are able to respond to needs of the territory, needs that will then help the society in general and the private sector to reach their specific goals. But in both contexts, although we are talking about an intermunicipal cooperation and autonomous communities, they have been reshaping both territories, Portugal and Spain. They have been reshaping their territorial governance or their governance towards a more territorial governance discourse. So they have been empowering the regional, being a regional or sub-regional level. They've been dealing with some devolution of powers from the central state, although in a minor degree in Portugal in comparison to Spain, with the ultimate goal of um, rehabilitating the administration, it improving the economic performance, ultimately supporting the quality of life of the citizens. And this also involves us as researchers, as some of the universities and research centers in both territories, Spain and Portugal, have been benefiting largely or through scholarships or through direct funding for buildings, for example, and creating new labs from the European Union. And then we still have Greece and Italy to talk about in a very much in the same style of slides in terms of administrative terms. But I will leave this to the beginning of the next lecture, which will be nice to then jump to the differences and similarities in terms of spatial planning. And let me reserve the last minutes for some of your questions, if any. Um, and while you are thinking about if you have some questions, I will invite you to share your thoughts with me. Uh, Maybe we have some knowledge about other territories working in a similar manner, more going beyond this formal organization of the territories and entering a more informal governance arrangement with the ultimate goal of improving the quality of life, the economic performance of these territories. Very much, this happens very much in a similar manner in Greece and Italy. Any question from your side before we close the lecture? Okay, so if not, I underline here in the last minutes we have the take-home message here, and something that is important for you to keep in mind and eventually bring to the exam is the definition of territorial governance and understanding that the way southern parts of Europe and again what's happened in Portugal and Spain unfolds in a similar manner in Greece and in Italy is the result of a proximity to the European Union discourse, so that what we call Europeanization, and the issues addressed currently through governance are slightly different than those addressed in the past. So currently, these governance arrangements involve a higher number and a higher number of private entities, and the economic domain of these arrangements is a flagship within the territorial governance arrangements. And if you ask me what I will forecast for the years to come in terms of this territorial governance from 2022 onwards, will be a higher focus on how to reorganize the economic landscape in a more sustainable manner. So I will see a lot of territorial governance arrangements coming through in terms of supporting sustainability transitions, energy efficiency, how to merge synergies, how to bring different types of knowledge together across these countries to address climate change, for example, to manage the water resources in a way that the impact of floods is minimized. So I see an evolution from the economic aspects. In the past, they used to be more political, more administrative in rigid sense. They evolved to the economic aspects, and I forecast an evolution towards a sustainability transition or the incorporation of sustainability discourse within territorial governance arrangements. And with this, I will conclude this third lecture, and I will see you next week for the continuation of territorial governance in Greece and in Italy, together with aspects of spatial planning. So hopefully everybody's still happy with this regional geography course. And so I will see you next week, and I can still stay here for a couple of minutes before my next lecture to address some of your questions, if any. So thank you so much for attending or for watching later that recording.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice rest of the week. All right, so I'm now concluding and closing the recording. So see you all next week.